failure topic, right?
About a failure.
I've been doing these for several years now, and I was looking through the news, and there's all this news at the national level about the clown circus going on, and all this news at the Texas state level. But there's a lot of issues that are still very important that are not getting a lot of airplay and a lot of interest, and I think that this is worthy of looking into, and this is about stem cells. So this is, if you're keeping count, show number 46 failures, so all of them fatal as far as I'm concerned. So I want to talk about Christian attitudes towards embryonic stem cells, in vitro fertilization, abortion, and some of these other things, but focus primarily on stem cells. Well, what are stem cells? They are pluripotent, meaning that they can differentiate into any type of cell from brain to muscle to bone. They are used in the development of medical treatments for a wide variety of conditions. They can be used to repair tissue damage, for example. And they can also have genes altered within them before the repair to effectively introduce those gene repairs into an individual. And the full potential of stem cells has yet to be realized, and that's kind of the big take-home of the message. And it could be used in all sorts of different ways. For example, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS and MS, all of these diseases could benefit from stem cell treatments that have yet to be completely developed. Organ regeneration, such as the pancreas for diabetics, macular degeneration if your eyes are failing to work, spinal damage and paralysis, bone marrow transplantation, stroke, burns, arthritis, cancer treatments, heart disease, and likely many more. So this is a very big thing that is sort of sitting on the back shelf in a lot of ways, especially in the policy arena. And that's because of a controversy, and that is that embryonic stem cells happen to be the most flexible and easiest to extract and utilize, but Christians generally consider embryos as full human beings that are not subject to experimentation. And so there's a controversy. And this controversy has set back stem cell research by over a decade, trying to get around these ethical restrictions. Meanwhile, an estimated 100 million people are dying early due to lack of treatments. This is just in the U.S. So 1 in 3 people in the U.S. is dying early due to the lack of treatments that have been delayed, now 16 years and counting. So this is a big deal, and it will affect everybody in the audience likely, either directly or indirectly through relatives and things, who will have these diseases and will be missing out on cures that would be created if it were around. Now let me shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about in vitro fertilization, a different topic. And here, eggs are extracted from a woman and fertilized in the lab, or in vitro means in the glass. Viable embryos are implanted in the uterus, often several at a time, and gestation and birth proceeds normally, often resulting in multiple births. So you often see very large triplets and quadruplets from these sorts of procedures. And the IVF clinics generally generate many more embryos that can be implanted due to the cost of the procedure and the relatively high likelihood of unviable embryos. Right? So there's a bit of a shotgun approach because there's a lot of embryos that just don't make it. And these leftover embryos that are not used are ultimately discarded. They're just pitched. And the parents of those embryos could donate those embryos for scientific research, but they can't. They're prohibited from doing so now. And this could be a great source of stem cell research, fodder for the research. And I have this quote. Yeah.
So there's one thing I wanted to chime in on before we keep going with the rest of it. You talked about potential cures that would result from this.
Right.
And just for clarity, before somebody writes in, we should probably say could result from this because we can't necessarily predict what would happen. But the problem here is that research is being stalled.
Right.
For something that could potentially, and we think has a strong likelihood of producing cures and treatments. But the other aspect of this is, by stalling the research, you have no idea what else you're preventing us from discovering and understanding about this.
Right. Right. And meanwhile, there's a huge opportunity cost. For example, Alzheimer's is currently the most expensive disease in America, costing more than cancer and heart disease. And it's estimated that the cost per year is $236 billion. So holy moly, what a big impact of if we could cure that, or we could make an impact and improve the lives of those folks and not have them be needing all that care. Boy, that would be a big improvement, right? So I think this is a great example of where we have a lot of harm that's sort of unseen, because science will progress and science will have many cures from stem cell research. This delay is costing us.
Now, there's an analogous situation as well, and that is the Arabic world was at the forefront of scientific thought and discovery at one point, and one of the things that stalled that was when an imam basically announced that mathematics is the purview of God, and that you shouldn't. And this stalled mathematical endeavors. And I would say, compare the state of technological understanding in the Western world compared to a good chunk of the Arabic world that fell underneath this edict, and you can see a disparity.
Yes, and it's really played out, and they're sort of still very far behind in so many ways. So I have a quote here that about George Bush, in a much anticipated decision on what he called a complex and difficult issue, in August 2001, President Bush cited the great promise from embryonic stem cell research and announced he would allow federal funding of a limited amount of research using existing stem cell lines, so no new lines. The president stopped short of allowing federal funding for research using stem cells derived from frozen embryos, about 100,000 of which exist at fertility labs across the country, many awaiting destruction. This is in 2001. The decision represents essentially the most restrictive use of federal money, and the administration could have permitted short of an outright ban, but the new policy veers away from Bush's previous outright opposition to federal support of this type of research. And this is due to George Bush's Christian leanings and his ethical stance, and nobody has changed this. None of the presidents have changed this, and this has been sort of ongoing. And you might claim that I'm casting a wide net here on Christians, but this is the effect. I mean, we measure Christianity by we know the fruits. By their fruits we shall know them. And
well, his position here, as it was refined, far more liberal than a lot of Christian churches were even comfortable with at the time.
Right.
Yeah, no research at all.
Right.
It's save all the frozen embryos.
Right. So that's stem cell research. Now let's contrast it here with intravenous fertilization. When that appeared in 1978, Christians went apeshit over that too. Would these little babies have souls? Would they be monsters? Would they come rape you in the middle of the night? That sort of thing. They were all afraid. And the idea is that you're playing with God, and all this was the mantra at that time. And today, IVF is not seen as a moral issue unless traits such as sex are selected for. Christians seem more concerned about the fact that it involves masturbation than it does destroying embryos, although you do hear some noise about that.
This is one of those cases where I absolutely wish my wife would just call in, because I don't know anybody who knows more about the specifics of this than she does.
Right. And today, that those couples that are using IVFs who are infertile, are claimed to be doing so with God's guidance, the Christian couples. And so many Christians feeling extreme pressure to reproduce may turn to an IVF clinic in order to help with infertility problems. 6% of women of childbearing age are infertile. And so I wanted to contrast these two things. This IVF is kind of a no big deal. It's just a little bit of noise in the Christian community. And the stem cell research, which is, oh my goodness, the sky is falling, we got to put a stop to this. And if you take a look at abortion, a woman who wants to have an abortion is treated like a murderer, pretty much, one step below that.
And that part, so their opposition to abortion is clear.
Yes.
I don't have enough data to talk about Christians in general as to whether they object more to IVF or more to stem cell research or what they're. I think they're spending so much time on abortion that I think either of those other issues seems to be.
Well, I'm
minimized.
going by the laws that are being put in place and restrictions and all the hoops that women have to go through. And IVF is really not that regulated beyond the medical side of things, right? And so, just this week, I think there's 3 or 4 bills in the Texas legislature about doing restrictions on abortion. So yes, it's a hot topic, and there is. Just going by that at the 20,000 foot level, and yes, this may not reflect all Christians, but it's the ones that are doing something. So we've got abortion, we've got stem cell, we've got IVF, and regular sex is still a big deal. You got to use the missionary position. There's prohibitions against masturbation. Contraception is a bad thing, and it shouldn't be used. And Plan B, forget it. And there's this quiverful movement, all this stuff. We've harped on a lot of those issues. So how do we reconcile the difference in attitudes here? Well, my opinion is there is no God who can make tithers, but Christianity needs tithers to survive. People who are paying money are keeping the thing alive. And these tithers must be manufactured because there's no God who's making them. So a woman seeking abortion is effectively preventing the creation of a potential tither, and that's bad. IVF is okay because if there's Christians doing it, they're going to make Christian babies who are potentially going to eventually tithe. And if you're having lots of sex and doing that in a marriage, that's the best outcome. But embryos, stem cell research from embryos or cloning does not result in tithers, and so that's completely off the table. So I think that explains what we're seeing as far as the difference in attitudes and the strength of the attitudes. You may disagree. I invite you to call in and debate that. I
may disagree.
Please do.
I think it's definitely an interesting case, but one of the problems that I have is when we start talking about what somebody's motivations for an action is. And so when you start talking about, this increases the number of tithers and this doesn't, that implies that there's somebody whose primary motivation is the number of tithers. And what we end up getting into is that, like, the church becomes some nefarious organization out here. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, by and large, the church is made up of people who just have sincere beliefs. Mm-hmm. And growing up Southern Baptist, tithing was encouraged, but it's not like you get ostracized or anything, if you weren't doing it. So I might just have a slightly different kind of look on tithing.
I'm being a little base there.
I get it. And I'm not saying that you're necessarily wrong or that I disagree. I think this is one of many things. I think it's a complex thing. But it reminds me of when people talk about the government as if it's something separate from us when we actually live in a participatory government. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as you, and I'm not saying this applies here, I'm talking about in the context I'm talking about, as soon as you start saying what somebody's motivations are and building a model that is consistent with all the available information in order to conclude that this is their primary goal, I have concerns. You may not be wrong.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I may be oversimplifying or jumping into a conclusion. But if we look at Christian morals as we see them sort of in laws and in the sort of culture war attitudes, we can see that they've changed over time, mm-hmm. especially with IVF. It used to be the sky's falling, can't have it sort of thing, and now it's okay because a lot of Christians want to have children. We've seen that the Christian morals are inconsistent. That throwing away embryos is terrible, terrible, terrible if it's abortion. But throwing away an embryo after IVF, no problem, not a big deal, not something we're going to make big laws against. And I think that we're seeing that Christian morals are self-serving. That the net result of all these attitudes are that Christianity is favored at the expense of non-Christians or people who would benefit from stem cell research or who are forced to bear children that they can't afford, those sorts of things. So
I think it's worth noting that if you are in favor of IVF and opposed to stem cell research, that there may be a very, very strong contradiction in the foundation of your views. Similarly, if you believe that, we would ask, if you believe that God answers prayer, why would you carry medical insurance? Why would you ever go to a doctor? And the most common answer that I've heard is, well, God also gave you a brain and he let us learn about medicine and he expects you to use that brain to go to the doctor to get sound medical. If that is your answer to why you go to a doctor, then how did you conclude that God didn't give us the possibility to use frozen embryos to cure diseases?
Right. And I'm somebody who's actually going to donate my body to science when I die, and
I would if they wanted it.
And the Bible, if they wanted it, okay. But the point is that that is something that one can do that is a benefit to humanity. And if it's a parent wanting to donate their embryos that are not going to become human beings, then why not? Why not allow that? And so we got a lot of fallout here from this Christian morals that are taking this decision away from other folks, I believe, that we've got 100 million people who are dying early due to diseases, not to mention all the suffering and the cost of hundreds of billions of dollars. And why? Because embryos that are going to be flushed down the toilet are too sacred to be used in research. And, this is sort of a tax that Christianity is placing on everybody. And they should have to pay for this, I think, somehow. But I doubt they ever will, and this is another failure of Christianity.
I think one of the biggest fears is that if they go along with the idea of stem cell research, that there will become an actual market where we're just running around creating embryos, intentionally for research, and that, women will become hosts. Oh, wait a minute, somebody's already tried to use that language.
Yeah.
We talked about that on Saturday at a fundraising podcast that we did to raise money for Planned Parenthood.
I think with the proper policy foundation, you can address some of these issues and deal with it. Anyway,
right.
let's take some callers.
Sure.